Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast. Today's entrepreneurs are mental athletes that have to know about the mind and how to keep it fit. Our goal is to increase our resilience against stress and anxiety, optimize our productivity, motivation, and optimism by learning about the human mind through psychology, neuroscience, and human behavior. I'm your host Ozan. I'm a founder who has experienced the challenges of launching and growing a business and a keen student of human behavior over the last 15 years. I'll share with you what I know and learn. Hundreds of impactful, behavior-changing ideas are waiting to be discovered by us. Let's begin now. Mental Fitness podcast audience, welcome, hello. I'm your host Ozan, and this week we have a guest for our show, Natsune Otsuki. Hope I pronounced that right.
Natsune.
Natsune, thank you very much. Our conversation actually started 3 weeks ago. It's longer than that. I think it's been 7 or 8 weeks since our conversation started, and we've been talking about Natsune's interesting story and how her content that she's created is actually really in line with some of the topics that we talk on the Mental Fitness Podcast. So we've made a decision to invite her over. Thank you very much for coming. And I really would like to get to know your personal story within the context of mental health, mental fitness. And actually, I think we learn from each other most of all. That I think that's really valuable as long as we are sincere and open about where we failed, how we made the decisions that we made. So I think that there's real value in that. And yeah, I would really like to hear about that. So maybe perhaps you can start talking about your background, your life, and give us an introduction to who you are and why you're interested with the mental fitness topic.
Yeah, hi, Ozan. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Natsune Oki. I'm a host at the Life Up Education TV. I'm also the author of The Game of Self-Domination. I also have a business in Tokyo called Foreign Connect, where I connect American businesses with local Japanese businesses for them to expand to Japanese market. And I do that vice versa for American companies as well. And I know that we have a very short time, like this podcast is like only 20 minutes. So I'm going to try my best to keep my story as short as possible because I tend to speak a lot. So like, feel free to stop me anytime I need to stop. So just to kind of give you a more quick picture of where I come from, like how I grew up and everything like that, my background story. I was born and raised in Japan. I was here till 18 years old. And through that entire life, I have always been like a failure. In Japanese society, I never felt I fit in, and I almost got kicked out of high school. Like, people thought I was failure, right? And
Why did I think you were a failure?
Mostly because I just like didn't fit in. And in the age of teenager, like you have a lot of like a deep, I don't know, like a complicated like frustration about you not fitting in, right? So you constantly try to cause problem or whatever. But it was really me just being curious about who I was, and I just wanted to, like, I was trying really hard to meet that person of who I am. So I tried different things that normal kids didn't try, and that got me into a lot of trouble. And finally, I kind of like said, look, like, I'm not going to be able to succeed in Japanese society. Like, look how different I am. I need to get out of this country to kind of explore and see a different country. And I always had curiosity about moving abroad. I just didn't know what country at that point, but I decided to be America. So I went there and I started studying language. I didn't even speak the language at all. Like, all I could say was like, hi, how are you? My name is, like, that was it. So I stayed in this language school for a little bit. And then after that, I decided to study business. So I studied a business for 2 years. And then after I got my like a half degree, once again, my next courageous decision came in, which I decided to just go explore the real world, this opportunity, like use this real opportunity working with like Americans, right? And at the time I was already like really interested in the concept of entrepreneurship and what it takes. So eventually I got the internship at the incubator program that had in Seattle, was in UW. And then I started working there. I started networking, and just opportunities started opening up because I made so many friends in that area. Like a tech startup entrepreneurial, like kind of a community, was big community in Seattle at the time. Probably it is now as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that year I basically decided to not pursue the university just yet. I just wanted to take some time off, which is super like unusual thing to do, right? Like once again, my courageousness came out, like choosing the decision that was true to me, even though wasn't very common for among other international students, friends, for example. But I did that anyway, and I learned a lot this year, especially the fact that because I was in tech field with lots of like, you know, leaders, I noticed how they thought about their life mission. It wasn't so much about money, but it was they were caring about the impact that they can make with the power of technology, and they were thinking about life at such a macro perspective, and that got me super inspired. And from that time on, I always had this mission of like, I want to contribute to the role of humanity. I want to expand our capability of humanity. And then that was later on leading to my mission with the Life Up Education TV, which is a media where I cultivate conversation around like how can we maximize our performance level to give back to the humanity, to expand our capability of humanity. And I talk about that from the perspective of art and science. So I do that, and after that, after I went back to school, I decided to study economics, and then I studied. And then after that, I was looking for, once again, this challenge, right? Like the kind of like suffering, but also growth experience that I had once again when I moved first in the abroad country with no one like around or whatever. And I wanted to have that experience once again. So I decided to moved to Miami. And actually, one of the other thing that I learned in that period is that the difference between the first one, well, the entrepreneurs, and then the people who work in the organization, probably the biggest difference is having a stomach, right? Like entrepreneurs are okay being uncomfortable, okay being like, you know, be just out there and be wild. Like there's no, you know, there's no fairness. Like at the end of the day, at the end of the day, if you want to be creator or leader, entrepreneurs in life, you really have to take whatever, and you have to be okay with the humility. You have to be okay with not having ego. You have to work in the dirt, like these kind of thing. And I wanted to really learn that. And you know, changing this complete like environment change, I subconsciously was looking for that very specific experience where I would face that very opportunity to learn that skill, like to be just kind of like be out there in the wild and just having a stomach, right? Like
Do you think that's
once
something that develops and changes and grows in time, or is it something inherent and has to do with some type of a personality trait?
I think I think it definitely can come with a journey. Like you kind of find out what you want after you're going through different experiences. So in the end, you might find out that even though that was something you wanted to have, in the end, like you might end up finding out that you don't want to have that kind of lifestyle, right? Like I think it's collective experience that kind of shape your perspective, and then that kind of enforces once again the definition of what kind of life is success to you specifically. But to back to your question, I think some of it come from the personality, but also a lot of it come from, like, in the end, what do you really want? You know, like if you really truly find that align with your virtue of who you are, then you'll probably figure out the way to get it.
But isn't there
And
something also intimidating about that? I mean, seeing the stories of people, they know very, very clearly what they want. And then you look at yourself and say, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I want that much. I don't know the purpose of what my purpose in life is. And
Mhm.
I know it creates some kind of an added pressure in some people. And it's quite difficult to discover
Yeah.
that and once you discover that, how do you know that it is actually your calling? So how do you actually deal with that way of thinking?
Like a pressure that you feel that you don't have it, or
Yeah, I
what do you
mean,
mean?
you see people who are really committed to a certain
Mhm.
idea and they know
Yeah.
100% that this is their purpose, and
Hmm.
you're not so sure about what your purpose is.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a difficult spot to be in. And I
Hmm.
know a lot of people are at that spot. So how have you dealt with that, if you have experience with that? Or how do you see
So
other people dealing with that?
right. So one of the thing I talk about is everything is your fault, right? Like when you notice that life gets real easier, and that's directly referred to this point where I want to say, like, you can cry, right? Like you can dwell on whatever you're lacking, like, on the fact that whatever you're lacking, and you can just be frustrated about that, but you're not gonna win if you keep being like that. Like you have to keep a persevere of what you want. And if you can't go through that phase, like having a faith in yourself, you're not meant to move up to the next level. Like you're gonna lose anyway if you can't find it. And then if you stop there, that's your game. Game over for you. So
Mhm.
you gotta keep persevere until whatever that is that you're looking for.
Mhm.
And I think it also kind of tests your virtue. Like it also kind of tests your true capability.
You
If
see
you're
your
not
limits
able
in a
to,
way, yeah?
yeah, like if you're not able to handle that amount of stress right now, you're not going to be able to handle stress that's coming, like I guess even bigger stress that's coming along the way for you to find for you to find that mission that you want. So I think if you don't find it, and if you like agree to just give it up, I think you should, by all means. Like it's going to be too stressful for you. But if you can persevere during these hard times, knowing that you got to raise your standard, if you want to pursue something in your life, you persevere. And I think that's kind of how I came down to
I
my.
understand. I understand that. But my personal approach to this is um, kind of more, uh, I would say, kind of nuanced, more nuanced than that. I think we have to be more resilient, and we definitely see our limits. And if if you cannot handle the stress of managing a two-person startup, then you definitely cannot manage the stress of five
Bigger
investors
problems.
and 300 people. That's true. But on the other hand, I also think it's a skill that you learn and that you can get better at. And
Hmm.
so this is like the whole premise of this mental fitness podcast uh, for entrepreneurs anyway. Um, Back in the day, we thought that this was some kind of an inherent capacity
Well, but
that
don't
people
get me
had.
wrong. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that this is a fixed mindset.
Mhm.
Like, I'm 100% in growth
I
mindset.
mean,
But what I'm
people can
saying
learn
is,
exactly, and then they can
oh,
grow. Yeah.
yeah, of course, by all means. And I think, like if you're disappointed and if you can't get back up, which is a willingness,
Hmm.
that's the willingness is what keeps you being fit here.
And the
So
willingness
if
to keep growing yourself and potentially learning new tactics about how to manage your stress. I think that's included in that as well.
yeah, 'cause, I mean, without willingness, without the intent, there's nothing that can happen. Like it all comes down to what you want, right? Like you're driven by the true motivation of what you want. So without that being absent, like the skill don't just come, the skill just don't happen. Like you have to persevere, you have to at least have the will to go through to acquire whatever the skill you need to acquire. But don't to kind of just wrap it up, like what I mean is, I don't mean to promote fixed mindset at all. Like by all means, I think everything can be learned, but for you to learn, you have to have the perseverance.
I think my takeaway from what you just said would be yes, focus on the business, be resilient about the business, but for like maybe 20% of your effort at least should go back into yourself and growing yourself and learning to become more resilient against stress, learning the tactics for that, learning the mindset for that, because we know a lot of more things than we did about neuroscience, about human psychology. And it is something that we can be more cognizant of and manage more actively rather than be very passive about, okay, I'm experiencing this stress. I need to be stronger and not experienced. I just need to push through. I think that brute force mentality does not always work. Sometimes we have to take a more diligent and kinder approach towards ourselves and say, okay, I'm having this issue right now. It's affecting my self-worth. I'm feeling quite disparaged, quite disappointed in myself. But why do I feel that? What is the real mechanism of that causes me to feel this bad? How can I overcome that? And once you learn about some of human psychology, you might say, you know what? For example, the fact that I have actually attached my sense of worth and self-being 100% to the success of my startup, then because of that, I'm feeling anxiety and stress. And okay, that's the reason. Let's try to uncouple that. Let's try to um, tell yourself and convince yourself that you are a valuable person, regardless of the success of your startup. So things like that, I think that approach can be very, very valuable, and that's something I think people tend to overlook. Um, but back to you. I mean, what was some of the harder, difficult decisions that you had to make? And I would really love to hear about that and maybe how that thought something about yourself to you. What you
Yeah.
discovered about yourself through those difficult decisions?
Mm. So I think, hold on, sorry, I want to make something, a point about what you said. And
Oh, yeah,
I agree with you. I think
absolutely.
there's
Go ahead.
multiple different ways to approach to this. And I think it comes down to self-awareness of knowing what method works the most effectively for you. But I guess what I meant to say was that, like even that like motivation of you wanting to look at different way, like find a different way to look at the situation to persevere, you still have to have a will, right? Like
Exactly.
so I guess at the very core, like the answer here is, I think this, what you want cannot be faked, right? And it's okay. I mean, change is life. If you change this, like it's also important that you don't blame yourself and just move on. But I mean, whatever you feel at that moment, whatever you want, you should just pursue it with the ease, and also just keep that perseverance of, I'll do whatever it takes for me to pursue. So I guess that's what I meant.
Yeah, that's a
Going
good
back.
point. That's a good point. It's about energy and directing that resource of that willpower and that desire of what you want towards that. And I agree with that.
Yeah. And then for the second question, like honestly, I have a lot, so many. Just because the way I live my life, or just because the way I decide to live my life, I tend to go like high risk decisions in my life a lot,
High risk, high
oftentimes.
reward place. So what was
Yeah.
one of those high risk, high reward place?
Well, I mean, just to begin with, like I almost got kicked out from high school. Like who the fuck does that? Like and the reason was because I was doing things that nobody was doing. Oh, it sounds so sketchy when I said it like this, or like when I decided to go to America all by myself with no friends, no family, no money, nothing. Like I
That
didn't
takes
even
guts.
speak.
It's not easy. It's definitely not easy. And I know it's as someone who has transitioned to UK from Turkey. In my personal experience, I've actually experienced something very similar. I know how difficult that is, and I cannot
Yeah,
imagine doing that alone. It must be just at least 2 or 3 times more difficult than doing it with, it's in my case, with my partner. So yeah, and yes, sorry, I interrupted you. And yeah, that's a difficult thing you were saying.
right. And then well, I mean, the decision goes on, but I guess no, the very very hard one would be starting my own thing. Starting my own business is probably the hardest one. And I don't know. I mean, what did I learn about myself? I think
Why do you think that's hard, by the way, before we go on? Why do you think it's...
why
Mm.
um most, I mean, this happened like very earlier phase, but it's more like you versus you, like it's not the world against you, but it's more like you managing your own mind, and you don't know if you're right or wrong, like all the time, right? Like you have this constant fear of like, what if I'm doing something wrong, right? And then the consequence is very serious, like for you to fuck it up. I mean, it's not really that serious, like if you really think about it, but at the very moment when you're caught with that emotion, like overwhelming emotion, you kind of feel like, oh my god, like it's gonna be so fucked up if I fuck it up, right? Like so yeah, that was really hard, and especially because I didn't have no one to cheer me up, basically, right? Like I was just pursuing my own thing, and I didn't have any other cheerleader by myself. And what did I learn about myself is that I'm strong. Like I would say I'm very strong, but in a sense that I always found a way to look at situation from very encouraging angle. Like even if everything was fucked up, like I always said, look, like I'm not gonna give up on myself. Like I'm not gonna care whatever people think or say about me at the end of the day. Like what I care about is my own opinion about myself, and I'm not gonna let that to be a failure. Like I'm never gonna call myself failure, because I know that failure is just an event. Like failure is never about the person, right? And I had to really gain this perspective from very practical hardships. I mean, in order for me to really plant this idea into my mindset. I mean, I always had this positive outlook of life, and I was always challenger in life in general. But I think because of the experience, I think it definitely gave me more depth in that belief. And now it's more like I'm more solid on that opinion, or on that thought, that I think I feel more confident about my capability. I feel more confident about me being okay with failing.
So, something that's quite difficult on the human soul is, and this is in contrast to working in a larger organization where you have a boss, you actually really don't know whether what you're doing is the best thing to do, is the best strategy out there, or it's not. And there's quite a tricky psychology, I would say, because you're managing two different personas in the business
Mhm.
at the same time. If you're a solo founder, or if you're managing a small business of less than 5 people, I would say you are at the same time the chief strategist of the business. And
Mhm.
then, because every day is not strategy day, on the other days of the week, or the month, you are the executioner. You just do that. And while you're doing that, you know in the back of your mind that this might not be the right strategy. So when you
Mhm.
have a boss, you have actually a very healthy way of letting the steam go and saying, "Oh, my boss is an absolute idiot. Like he or
I
she
don't know about
wants me to
healthy
do that."
way. Yeah,
It
I
might not be
completely
the
get
best,
it.
it might not be the
Yeah,
healthiest way, but like there is that kind of a psychology where you say it is someone else's thing, and like my
yeah,
responsibility starts here, and
right.
like you can really focus on that. And at the end of the day, you
Mhm.
can still say, you know what, I am successful because I did my job right. But when you're like
Mhm.
a solo founder, because you have both of those responsibilities, it's quite tricky to manage that, I find. I don't know if you
Like
feel.
honestly, that's another point. Like it's all about self-awareness. There's no right or wrong way to do anything, but I personally don't feel good about blaming other people. Like I don't like blaming. Like I blame myself all the time, and I mean everything is my fault. Like it's so comfortable to blame others, and like you said, it might be for some people it is healthier way to deal with their life, right? Like I mean, it's okay, like whatever works for you works for you, so it's okay. But for me personally, I tasted both sides. Like I mean, I worked in a company before too. Actually was for an American company, and I just didn't feel good. Like you know, like I mean, people are blaming on our bosses, including myself, and I just didn't feel good. And I think it's also because of that experience, I kind of know what I want. And in terms of, once again, the self-awareness, coming back to the question of self-awareness, some people don't mean to have that comfortability in order for them to be happy. And for me, I'm that side where when it comes to work, of course, I guess certain things in the society, maybe I still contain some victim behavior, but in terms of, work and career, I try to banish as much as possible in that victim behavior. But I mean, once again, there's no right or wrong way. And in the end of the day, what matters is your happiness. So I'm not saying that this is right way for anyone, but for me, this is personally something that works for me in terms of happiness.
I understand that, but I like the idea of everything is your fault. In psychology, this is referred to as locus of responsibility in a way. And on the one end of the spectrum, you see everything that is, you see everything in your control and everything that you can affect. So it's an internal locus of control. That is how that is referred. So for example, when you're running a project in a company, that project fails, and if you have a very internal locus of control, you say, what could I have done to make sure that that project didn't fail? On the other end of that spectrum, if you have a very external locus of control, you would say, oh, the project failed because we did not have enough funding. The project failed because the project manager didn't do this, etc. And this actually translates to other areas of life, especially as an entrepreneur. So I think one of the most trickiest things to manage as an entrepreneur is if you have a locus of control that is very, very external, then you will not actually get out of bed and accomplish anything really. Because yes, the customer is an idiot probably for not understanding the value of your products, but it doesn't change anything. You still cannot make the
Yeah.
sale. On the other hand, if you are very, very internal locus of control focused, then that's hugely difficult on the human psyche. For example, in a time like COVID or like Brexit or some other crisis that's going on in the country we are living in, or a national or an international crisis, a locus of control sees that as his or her responsibility as well. But it's not the case. There's nothing you can do about it. Sometimes it really is external. So it's quite difficult to balance that. And I think this is one of the most trickiest things to balance, because on the one hand, when you're internal focused, it actually keeps your growth engines churning along, which is good. But at the same time, it can be really difficult for the human psychology. Have you experienced anything of that sort? Or if so, how do you manage that balance? Or where do you
Have
put
I experienced like what?
that challenge with balancing out that internal versus external, more specifically or more tangibly, looking at a situation and saying, is this my fault? Or there's nothing I can do about it and just move on? Have you experienced these kind of
Yeah,
dilemmas ever?
like, honestly, I don't spend too much energy. Well, I don't spend zero energy on whatever I cannot control. Like, I mean, like to me, I think it all comes down to practicality, like you said. Like, I mean, for me, practicality is the number one priority. Productivity, practicality is number one priority. You can dwell on the emotion, like negative emotions of whatever happens, but like once again, like it's not going to produce any output if you keep being in that state. And like if you have the time to dwell, like why don't you just work on producing, right? And that's the kind of approach I have to many things, so that I don't necessarily spend time like dwelling and thinking about, I don't know how to balance. Like I don't do that, but instead I would be like, look, I mean, whatever happened, and from now on, it's my responsibility to make the situation better. So let's not dwell, let's just do, and let's create or produce whatever that contribute to solving. I'm not gonna complain, I'm gonna solve. Like that's the kind of approach I've been kind of trying to build with my mindset.
How do you deal with rejections?
Rejections? I mean, to be quite honest, like I'm not quite like super expert on that, but I have a lot of insights around it, and I think over time I became a lot better at handling it. And one other thing I know is that, like for example, social media, for example, let's say, one thing I noticed was that positive comments or negative comments, they don't mean anything. Like they don't make me more valuable person. or they don't make me less valuable person, right? And that's something I noticed. And why do I think like that? Because, well, a lot of time these rejections come from them wanting to be heard. Like they're being cynical, they're being whatever it is, like they're hurting themselves. So
Yes, it's a pain.
they want they want the companies, and then they want to bring other people down, and it's not about me.
Just a quick side note there. Like we know from
Yeah.
psychology and new research that actually rejection, social rejection, is exactly the same in the brain as physical pain.
Mm-hmm. I actually wrote that in my book too.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But anyway, so I once I noticed that, like, I try to so I hate ego too. So I try to look at situation from what they want. Like I decided to stop focusing on what they did to me, but instead I try to listen to them of what's hurting them, and try to be helpful instead of being right or smart or whatever, right? Like I don't care to be the right person. I care to be helpful for others. And I think when you have that approach of you having zero ego and genuinely wanting to help someone else to feel better, I mean, that's the best you can do as well, So that's kind of how I think of it now.
Focusing on giving rather than taking in those interactions, I think that's how I
Yeah.
approach, but it comes to a very similar conclusion.
Mm.
So I know the book really matters to you, and it's at the center of some of the things that you're doing, the content that you're doing. So and
Yeah.
I'm sure there are things that you would like to share from there
Mm.
that we've not had chance to discuss up until now. So what are a few things that you would want people to know about, to hear about,
Mm.
who are listening to this?
Well, I mean, I have many, but I think number one message of my book, it's called The Game of Self-Domination, right? So the number one message really overall is to say that, hey, like everything is your responsibility. And I guess the second message I would say, I mean, it's a long book, so, it goes like really different stories and different areas to really make the point of this. So now, like, if you hear this out of context, like it sounds like, wow, like that's so simple. But yeah, throughout the book, I talk about like various different things from various different angles. So the number one message is everything is your fault, and that was why. Well, not everything is your fault. I guess everything
That's
is
such,
your responsibility.
yeah, that's such a difficult thing. It's such a difficult sentence to swallow, isn't it? Everything is your fault. I don't know how you rationalize that within the book, but I guess we need to take a look to figure it out. But it just seems there are quite high number of circumstances where I could say, okay, everything is not my fault in a way. So how do you actually
But see, once again,
face that criticism?
because I'm focusing on practicality, I'm focusing on producing, focusing on productivity. I like, once again, my mission is I want to contribute to the advancement of humanity, the possibility of humanity, right? And I cannot come from the place of, oh, this is not possible, this is someone else's fault, like this is not my fault. Like I can come from that position if I want to achieve that, you know what I mean? Like you have to be willing to work from where you are and produce whatever you can produce, and that's the best you can do, right? And that's the approach I have. And I guess my book breaks it down at a lot more personal level. I mean, of course, my macro mission is still like a humanity level, but I think one of the biggest assets we have is mindset. The way we perceive our world really defines how much we want to achieve and we achieve throughout our life, right? So I wanted to create this very tool that people can use to train their asset, the best asset they have in their life, which is their mindset. So yeah, that's the approach I have. And I guess to give you a little bit more context, I just said the summary as like very impactful one sentence, but really the book is designed to find out what you want with 3 different phases, and also gives you tools to really be persevere in life. And I have a lot of like practical positive narrations that you can use in your life that's going to make you produce.
One last question that I'm really curious about,
Yeah.
especially on this, in my experience, learning about entrepreneurship, how startups grow, how businesses are built, how individuals become successful. I think about 70% of the contents that I've consumed on this topic comes from the US, because of its domination in the English content landscape, and the number of tech companies and stories that came out of there, Silicon Valley and so on, and the thought leaders. I mean, so I think there's a bias there. However, coming into the UK, my personal experience of observing how business works, how startups become successful, is quite different. Also, my experience in Istanbul is quite different. So I have 3 samples in a way. Um, and I would really like to hear your thoughts about what your personal observations are that are not being perhaps as openly discussed as possible in the content that is being created by the tech industry out there, but are actually some challenges or opportunities or like unique ways of how things really work in the US. Do you have any insights about that?
In the US or like in general, like
In the
so
US,
you're
I would
saying
say.
in the US, so you're
Mm.
saying that a lot of these self-help contents come from US, and what's unique about my book?
No, what I mean to ask, to be more clear, is, for example, Reid Hoffman creates content like LinkedIn, and like Mark Zuckerberg says something, Brian Chesky says something, Reid Hoffman says something. So, and these are community influencers that talk about a certain way of working, and a lot of content, how to be successful in business, how to build your startup and do that. They come from the US, and they actually
Yeah.
they talk within a certain cultural norm, which is the US norm. It's not universal. It's different in the UK. It's different in Turkey. It's different in Japan. So in your observation, my question is, what are things that are being potentially ways to get ahead, that are things that really work well, or that are real challenges that are under discussed, that are not talked about in these
Right.
content that's being, so, and what have you found personally really useful?
Um, like I think one of the things that I've been told through my leaders, that something that's unique about my book is that book and aka also me, about like how I think of things. I guess even if I have such a like a US character, like I admire like US capitalism and all that, like I have a lot of appreciation for it, but a lot of people also tell me that I have a blend of like coming from Zen place, like a Japanese, like my really my culture, right? Like I'm subconsciously bringing in my beliefs,
Mm.
which I had no idea. Like I always thought I was a lot more like a United States person, right? But a
Mm.
lot of people who read my book basically told me that, like, because in the end, like I summarize my book toward in the chapter, I start talking about let's redefine the definition of success and happiness, which is something not a lot of US books or US people talk about, right? Like
Mm.
they all talk about, like, in terms of context, in context of business and startups, like we've been talking about, a lot of entrepreneurs and founders talk about let's redefine definition of failure, which is hands down like for sure needed topics to be discussed. But I think a lot of people don't talk too much about what does it mean to be successful? Like what is success? What is happiness, right?
Mm.
And these things are kind of skipped because they kind of assume that people are going for the same goal, and they kind of outsource the goals from the media, from the existing examples, and kind of like automatically assume these are the things that they need to pursue. But
Mm.
then that's the place I kind of come from, the Zen place,
I see.
where I really go deep into what does that mean? Like, because it's very like subjective, and it's very like, it can be very personalized.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason so many people are unhappy is because you guys do that. Like you guys outsource this answer, which is very, very important answer that you need to find for yourself to someone else.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. It's something that I'm curious. I'm trying to learn more about and understand, because I think there are nuances there that are under discussed. And I think a lot of what we think is universal in how to grow a business is actually local in a lot of senses. Because people are local and our perception is local. The way you build trust, the way you actually judge people without knowing, you actually the way you actually judge businesses, like it's quite different. In being a company that's 6 months old means something different in the UK and in the US and in Japan, I guess. I think this is the under discussed part of things, and the signaling value of things. So that's where my question was targeted at. Thank you very much for your comments on that. So I guess to wrap up, um, it's really interesting the variety it comes from seeing different geographies and different situations, and you've actually shown a huge amount of courage in actually jumping onto your own business. And I would actually echo that. One of the most difficult things I have done is actually build my own business and be on this path. And I think from this conversation, the most exciting nugget of thought for me, I would like to just underline and leave our viewers and audience with, is that yes, um, you can push yourself and you can want something really bad, but you also have to direct that energy um, towards being more intelligent about what's actually going on internally, was like getting to know yourself, understanding if you're feeling something bad, be cognizant of why you're feeling bad, and learn more about yourself, and use that actually, rather than trying to break through the wall by hitting your head again and again. Maybe sometimes stop and look what's the next strategy to optimize your psychology, because your psychology is the biggest resource that you need to manage, because it's the most difficult thing that you can do to build your own business, as I would say. Thank you very much for being a part of this. I really enjoyed our chat. And for the audience, do check out Natsune's book. We'll leave a link in the description. Is there anything you'd like to add as we conclude?
Oh, no. Well, thank you very much for having me today, first of all. And I'm also foundable at Life Up Education TV. You can find me from lifeupeducationtv.com, and I'm all on social, like TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
That's good. Great to have this chat, Natsune. Take care. Talk to you soon. And goodbye
Thank
to
you.
everyone. See you in the next episode.